The air in the lawyer's office was thick with tension. Emma sat stiffly, her hands clenched in her lap. Across from her, Margaret, her late husband's mother, wore a smug expression. Dressed in elegant black, she acted as though she had lost a loving son, though Emma knew better. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "To my beloved wife, I leave our home, our savings, and all my personal assets," he read. Margaret's smirk faltered but quickly returned. She was sure the money, Daniel's stocks, investments, and properties, were hers. But the lawyer wasn't done. "And to my mother, Margaret," he continued, lifting a separate letter, "I leave this personal message." Emma watched as Margaret snatched the letter, her eyes narrowing as she read. Her face twisted in fury. "This is a joke," she spat. Emma's hands trembled as the lawyer handed her a copy of the letter. She read each word slowly, her chest tightening. "Mother, if you're reading this, you probably think you've won. But you haven't. You controlled me my whole life, but in my final moments, I made my own choices. Everything I have belongs to my wife, the woman who stood by me when you never did. You never truly loved me, only the idea of owning me. I owe you nothing." Margaret's face turned pale. Her hands clenched the paper so tightly, Emma thought it might tear. "This isn't over," Margaret hissed, shoving the letter away. "That house should be mine. That money should be mine." The lawyer leaned back. "You're welcome to contest the will, but Daniel made sure it was ironclad." Margaret glared at Emma, seething. "You'll regret this." Emma barely made it home before the phone rang. She ignored it at first, but after the fourth call, she picked up. "You think you've won?" Margaret's voice was sharp with rage. "You were nothing before my son, and you'll be nothing again soon." Emma took a deep breath. "Daniel made his choice. You need to accept it." Margaret scoffed. "We'll see about that." Days later, Emma found an eviction notice taped to her door. Heart pounding, she rushed to call her lawyer. "She's contesting the will," he sighed. "She's claiming your marriage was fraudulent, that you manipulated Daniel while he was sick." Emma's stomach twisted. "Can she do that?" "She can try," the lawyer admitted, "but she has no case. That doesn't mean she won't make your life hell trying." Emma closed her eyes, knowing Margaret wasn't done. The courtroom was filled with whispers as Margaret took the stand. Dressed in all black, she dabbed at fake tears, playing the part of a grieving mother. "My son was confused in his final days," she sobbed. "He would never have left everything to her." Emma gritted her teeth as Margaret spun lie after lie, claiming Emma isolated Daniel, tricked him, took advantage of his illness. The lawyer stood, calm and firm. "Mrs. Caldwell, do you have any evidence?" Margaret faltered. He told me," he said, objection, hearsay. The judge dismissed Margaret's case within minutes. She had nothing, no proof, no claim, nothing but bitterness. Emma felt a wave of relief as the gavel struck. But as she glanced at Margaret's face, twisted with rage, she knew this war was far from over. Emma returned home that evening exhausted but relieved. Margaret had lost in court, and that should have been the end of it. But as she stepped onto her porch, something felt wrong. The front door was slightly ajar. Her breath caught. She knew she had locked it. Slowly she pushed it open. The house was dark, eerily silent. Then she saw it. Her living room was in ruins. Furniture overturned, pictures shattered, drawers yanked open. Papers littered the floor. Emma's hands shook as she backed out, fumbling for her phone. The police arrived quickly, but found no forced entry. "Are you sure you locked the door?" an officer asked. Emma nodded. She didn't need proof to know who had done this. Margaret wasn't finished. In the following days, strange things kept happening. Late at night, Emma noticed cars idling outside her house. Her trash cans were knocked over repeatedly. Dead flowers appeared on her doorstep. Sleep became impossible. Every creak in the house sent her heart racing. She double-checked the locks, but it never felt secure enough. Then, one evening, a knock at the door made her stomach drop. She peeked through the peephole. "Margaret." Emma hesitated but finally opened it. Margaret smiled, her eyes cold. "Enjoying the house?" she asked, voice dripping with mockery. Emma stayed silent. Margaret leaned in. "This isn't over," she whispered. "You took my son, and now I'll take everything from you." For the first time, Emma didn't feel afraid. She felt angry. Emma barely had time to process the confrontation before her phone rang the next morning. Her lawyer's voice was tense. "We have a problem." Dread curled in Emma's stomach. "What now?" "Margaret just filed a new lawsuit," he sighed. She's claiming Daniel left a secret will, one that gives everything to her. Emma's head spun. That's impossible. She has a witness, he continued. Someone who says they saw him sign it. Emma braced herself. Who? Silence. Then, a name that shattered her trust. David, Daniel's childhood best friend, his best man, the person Emma had leaned on after Daniel's passing. Her voice broke. He's lying. The lawyer sighed. Looks like Margaret bought herself an ally. Emma clenched her fists. Enough was enough. Emma stormed into her lawyer's office, ready to fight. He had already begun digging into Margaret's so-called will. This is a forgery, he said immediately, but we'll need proof. Emma felt trapped. Then, the lawyer turned to his computer. There's something Daniel left behind, a video. Emma's breath hitched. The screen flickered to life. There he was, Daniel, gaunt but determined. His voice was steady. If you're watching this, it means my mother is trying to take what isn't hers. Margaret, I knew you'd do this. Tears welled in Emma's eyes. Then Daniel's expression darkened. I also know about the money you stole, the accounts you hid, and I set a trap. Emma's heart pounded. Margaret had no idea what was coming. Emma sat frozen as Daniel's voice filled the room. His words were precise, deliberate. Mother, I know about the stolen money, the accounts you drained, the inheritance you hid. You thought I wouldn't notice, but I did. Emma's lawyer leaned forward. Wait, what money? Daniel continued, his gaze piercing through the screen. I found the transactions, the secret withdrawals, and I traced every dollar back to you. Emma's breath caught. Margaret hadn't just been after the house, she had already been stealing for years. Then came the final blow. I knew you'd try to take more, so I set a trap. Every fake account, every shady transfer, it's all documented, and now the truth will destroy you. Margaret had walked straight into her own downfall. The next morning, Emma's lawyer wasted no time. He handed Daniel's evidence to the authorities. Within hours, investigators started combing through Margaret's finances. Bank transfers, fraudulent transactions, fake companies. It was worse than anyone had imagined. She didn't just steal from Daniel, the lawyer muttered, scanning the files. She stole from his father, his business, even charity accounts. Emma's stomach twisted. This wasn't just greed, it was decades of deception. Then another name surfaced. David. Emails revealed he had helped cover her tracks, moving money through hidden channels. He hadn't just lied about the will, he had been part of Margaret's schemes all along. Emma exhaled slowly. What happens now? Her lawyer smiled grimly. We don't just fight back. We burn them both to the ground. Margaret never saw it coming. She had spent her life manipulating people, but this time she had miscalculated. It started with the IRS freezing her accounts. Then, law enforcement arrived at her home with search warrants. Emma woke up to breaking news. Authorities investigate financial crimes linked to Caldwell Estate. By midday, Margaret was arrested. Cameras caught her being led out in handcuffs, her face pale and furious. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions. Mrs. Caldwell, did you forge the will? Did you steal from your own family? She said nothing, her lips pressed into a tight line. David tried to flee. He made it to the airport, but was caught attempting to board a one-way flight to Mexico with a suitcase full of cash. The betrayal had cost them everything. Margaret's trial was brutal. The evidence was undeniable. Bank fraud, embezzlement, forgery. Every crime was laid out before the court. But the real turning point came when Daniel's second video was played. If you're watching this in a courtroom, then my mother is still trying to steal what isn't hers. Let me be clear. She is a liar, a thief, and a fraud. Gasps echoed in the courtroom. Margaret's face went ashen. To those of you still believing her lies, ask yourself this. Why did she steal from my father? Why did she bribe my best friend? Why did she forge my will? Margaret gripped the table, her hands shaking. The judge delivered the final verdict. 15 years in prison. David got 10. Justice had been served. Emma watched from the back of the courtroom as the judge handed down the sentences. Margaret sat rigid, her face pale, her hands trembling. She had spent a lifetime controlling others, but now she had no power, no escape. David didn't look much better. His betrayal had cost him everything, his freedom, his reputation, and whatever money Margaret had promised him. As they were led away, Margaret turned, her eyes locking onto Emma's. Hatred burned there, but beneath it, fear. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Emma didn't gloat, she simply turned and walked away. Outside, the fresh air felt different, lighter. For the first time in months, she could breathe. Margaret had lost, and Emma, she was finally free. Weeks passed. Emma started rebuilding her life. Then one morning, an envelope arrived. The handwriting was familiar. Margaret. Emma hesitated before opening it. You think you won, but without Daniel, you are nothing. You took him from me, and I will never forgive you. Emma stared at the words, unreadable emotions swirling inside her. After everything, Margaret still refused to take responsibility. She folded the letter neatly, walked to the fireplace, and tossed it in. The flames consumed it instantly. Margaret wanted control, even from behind bars, but she had nothing left to hold on to. Emma wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a response. She was done. Margaret was no longer her problem. Emma stood outside the house, the one she had fought so hard to keep. But as she looked at it, she realized something. It wasn't home anymore. It was a battleground, filled with memories of pain, manipulation, and loss. So she made a decision. She sold it. Every room, every wall, every trace of Margaret's war against her, gone. With the money, she started fresh. A new town, a new home, far away from the chaos. For the first time in years, there were no threats, no court dates, no sleepless nights, just peace. She walked into her new home, closed the door behind her, and smiled. This was hers, and no one could take it away. Sitting on her porch, Emma ran her fingers over an old photo, her and Daniel, laughing on their wedding day. She had lost him, but his love had protected her even in death. Margaret had tried to erase her, to steal everything Daniel left behind. But in the end, she was the one erased, imprisoned, forgotten, powerless. Emma had won, not through revenge, but through survival. She hadn't let Margaret break her. Daniel had outplayed them all. Emma looked up at the sky, whispering, "Thank you." She wasn't just Daniel's widow. She was Emma, stronger, wiser, and finally free. And that was the greatest victory of all. Months passed, and Emma's new life felt almost like a dream. No court battles, no threats, no Margaret lurking in the shadows. But one afternoon, a familiar name appeared in the news. Former socialite Margaret Caldwell denied early release. Emma read the article with detached curiosity. Margaret had tried to appeal her sentence, claiming poor health. The court had refused. A part of Emma had expected Margaret to fade into obscurity, but some people never change. Even behind bars, she still fought for control. Emma closed the article and set her phone down. Margaret's downfall was her own doing. Emma wouldn't waste another second thinking about her. Her past no longer defined her. Only the future mattered now. One day a call came from her lawyer. Margaret passed away. Emma felt nothing. No relief, no sadness, just an emptiness where pain had once lived. She had no assets left, no will, he added. David is still serving his time. Emma nodded. There's nothing left for me there. She didn't attend the funeral. Few people did. Margaret had burned every bridge, destroyed every relationship. Standing at the edge of her new garden, Emma whispered her final goodbye, not to Margaret, but to the part of herself that had once feared her. She had won long before Margaret took her last breath. This was the true ending. Emma was free, and Margaret was nothing more than a forgotten story. Life moved forward. Emma built something new, something that belonged only to her. She met people who knew nothing of her past. They saw her not as Daniel's widow, not as a woman who had fought a war, but simply as Emma. And then, unexpectedly, she found love again. It wasn't the same as before, but it didn't have to be. Daniel had been her past, and he had given her strength. This was her future, a future Margaret had tried to steal, but never could. One day, as she walked hand in hand with someone new, she realized something. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and Daniel would have wanted that. Emma's journey had been one of loss, betrayal, and resilience. But in the end, she had won. Not with revenge, but by refusing to let hatred consume her. Margaret had fought for control until the very end, but all it had earned her was isolation. Daniel had seen the truth long before his death. He had protected Emma in life and even beyond the grave. Emma had survived, rebuilt, and found happiness again. What do you think? Did Margaret get what she deserved? Was justice served? Let us know in the comments. And if you love this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping tales of drama, betrayal, and revenge. Because sometimes real life is stranger than fiction.